Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully, everyone's having a wonderful day. And this is a video that's long overdue that I've been waiting to actually put together. And my channel has a ton of like music stuff, and then we also, of course, do Pokemon, but a majority of the stuff I've been doing is music related. And um, as you all know, I've been practicing a certain type of instrument since the lockdowns in 2020. And it's kind of time to talk about that instrument in depth and to give like a basic rundown of this type of instrument. And if you could see on the table that I have in front of me, we have four of this kind of instrument with us. So these are my recorders, and I have four types of them with me today. So here's the standard soprano recorder. We also have the alto, that those two figurines are just making sure it doesn't roll off the table. This is the alto. Then we could do kind of a size comparison there. Then the next one would be the tenor. This is the tenor recorder. Hopefully it doesn't roll off. And okay, I think they're going to all roll now, which is okay. There we go. Okay, so this is the tenor recorder. So the tenor, as you can see, it's a larger instrument. It's a longer recorder than the alto, and the general rule is when you have a larger instrument compared to others in its family, you're going to have a deeper range. So that's true for the tenor recorder. And here's again the comparison to the soprano, or the standard recorder that's being taught in elementary or middle schools. As you can see, it's about twice the length of a standard soprano recorder, and interestingly enough, this one is actually one octave below our standard soprano. We also have one more recorder here, but I do not have a bass recorder. That one would be even larger than the tenor. What I do have is a recorder that's even smaller than the soprano recorder, and this is going to be the soprano recorder. So this is a much smaller instrument than our regular soprano. Here it is, close up. And it's actually one octave higher than our alto recorder. So there'll be like specific videos on each of these instruments in the future. This is just going to be a run through and kind of an introduction to the recorder family as a whole. I might as well just put them all like that. So I'm going to go and pick up, or I'm going to do a demonstration a bit on this recorder as I'm going through the history. Okay, so a brief crash course on the history of the recorder. So it's a vertical flute. This would be how a concert flute would be held. Instead of like this, the recorder stems from instruments in the woodwind family that would have been known as the vertical flutes. Specifically, they're duct flutes, as you could see that notch in the head joint there. So there are a lot of similar instruments to a modern day recorder that were found in Neolithic time periods. These were going to be, again, our vertical flutes that were blown from the top to the bottom instead of to the side. And these early flutes would have been made out of bone or just materials like that, and you would have, of course, tone holes to change the pitch. The recorder, or instruments that we could actually call most similar to the recorder, would have popped up in the medieval time period, and that's where you had a ton of wind instruments also being developed. There's a lot of folk instruments in the medieval time period. There wasn't any music written for the recorder per se, specifically calling for the recorder as an instrument. However, in the next period, we do see a ton more recorder repertoire. So in medieval period, there is this interest in getting these wind instruments, and we see some of the predecessors of the recorder and early recorders themselves being developed in the medieval time period. Again, this is just a run through. We'll go through all this in more detail in a later video about these beautiful instruments. Okay, now let's go into the Renaissance period. So the Renaissance will have a ton more of recorder development. You'll have recorder consorts, so you'll have different sizes of the recorder, just like what we have in front of us right here. You'll have different versions of the recorder, different models, but they're still going to be adding tone holes, again, trying to expand the range in these recorder consorts. That's where you have a group of players playing different sizes of recorder, from maybe sopranos to fourth flutes to altos to tenor voice ones, and then to your bass recorders. In the Renaissance, they actually had these very towering bass instruments that were covering, of course, the lowest melodies and the lowest parts of these ensemble pieces, and recorders would have been used with other wind instruments at the time. So thinking of like those, I guess you could call it like court instrument type things in the royal town squares or the royal buildings of the kings and queens. You would have a group of musicians. They would be playing wind instruments, and most likely they would be playing recorders. Fun fact, the name recorder comes from the early English and French languages, and it originates from, of course, to record. In that language, in that version of English as well as early French, to record meant to recite or to remember. So you would had like a court musician or a minstrel or even a jester, one of those jesters always up to tricky things. So they would be playing music, but then you would have to somehow recite, or you would repeat the melody that's being sung. These melodies back then, sometimes they're just passed down orally. They weren't really written down. So when you're in a town square and you want to play like a melody, a lively piece of music to lift everyone up, you would have a recitation of that music on the instrument, the recorder. And so that's one of the theories where the name recorder actually came from. So in the Renaissance period, you actually had repertoire that was specifically for wind instruments, and therefore recorders could be used on them. Some examples would be Michael Praetorius' Dances of Terpsichore. This is a collection of all these like greatest hits of dances from the Renaissance time period. And the scores call for soprano, alto, tenor instruments, and these could be played on a variety of instruments. Sometimes you have viols playing them. You could also have wind instruments from the time period playing them. You could also have recorder consorts playing these pieces in the Renaissance period. Okay, so now we go into the Baroque period, and this is where the recorder repertoire and the recorder kind of has its moment in the spotlight. So famous Baroque composers such as Bach, Handel, Telemann, and even Vivaldi, the composer of the Four Seasons, wrote extensively for the recorder. The main ones that they would have used in their time period would be the alto recorder in F. The alto recorder in F is again deeper than the regular soprano recorder, and in this time period, the word flute or flauto, when they talked about flauto in their sheet music, this was referring to the recorder, an alto recorder, or sometimes they would say flautino, which would be a soprano recorder, or flauto piccolo, which would have been a soprano recorder. The word flauto would mean the flute later on as the development of the transverse flute, which is kind of the predecessor of the Western concert flute, where you would play it going to the side instead of vertically like that. So as that instrument developed, the scoring, the words used in the score for what instrument you would be using, changed from flauto to transversier or transverse flauto, and then later on it became the flauto, equaling the Western concert flute. Okay, so back to the recorder. We were mentioning how in the Baroque time period, of course, they had different developments to the instrument. You had different models and new innovations on the shape, the bore of the instrument, the placings of the tone holes, and then, of course, the repertoire for alto and other, I would say, niche instruments. In the recorder family, we mentioned some of the flauto piccolo or flautino concertos by Vivaldi. He wrote about like 5 of them, if I remember correctly. And Handel used the alto and the soprano recorder in his water music, in the third suite of water music. Telemann also wrote a few pieces for the recorder, a few concertos and whatnot. Going back to Bach, so in his Brandenburg concertos, he actually lists this instrument called the Fauzi di Eco, and it's kind of a controversy to what instrument he was trying to call for in this score because there's an impossible note on the first recorder part. This concerto is scored for a pair of recorders and a solo violin. And in the first and third movements of the concerto, they followed Italian form, which is fast, slow, fast. So these are the two fast movements of the concerto. There's an impossible note. I put impossible in air quotes because it's possible on some modern instruments, but back then it was kind of impossible to reach it. It's this very high F sharp, and the first part, the first recorder has it. And the term flauta diaco wasn't in any dictionary or music encyclopedia at the time, so it was kind of a debate to whether Bach meant an alto recorder in G, or he meant an English flageolet, which is a flute-like instrument very similar to the recorder. And then in the second movement, there's another twist to the story, where he calls again for the echo effect. So he has forte and piano written in the score for the recorders. However, echo flutes were a pair of two recorder-like instruments that one of the instruments would produce a softer tone color while the other one was more prominent. It was more louder just because of the material, or it was a separate instrument. And so there's a theory where they would switch between the two instruments that were conjoined in the second movement to do the forte and the piano. So all in all, the recorder used in this concerto, it's still theorized that it was just an alto in F. This is an alto in F, and Bach wrote for very virtuosic players. Even though the Brandenburg concertos weren't actually played in his lifetime, back then when you were writing these very intricate parts, you would have in mind the skill set of the potential performer for him. So this instrument was used for his concertos, especially the Brandenburg concerto, and yeah, it was used in a lot of those virtuosic pieces in the Baroque period. Okay, so now we talked about the classical period. It kind of touched into it where it was going to be replaced by the Western concert flute. And this is where like the recorder repertoire kind of dips down. You don't see many pieces in the classical period for any of the types of recorders. They're all being replaced by the flute. There's a few reasons for this. The recorder wasn't kept in a group of actual specialists at the time. There wasn't a maintained group of specialists in the instrument. The tessitura was just a little too difficult to write for in the classical style. The classical style is all about blending, and there's a big emphasis on the string instruments in the classical period, and the flutes would just need to kind of blend, have a little bit of spotlight, and then blend in. The recorders were also in a different, dare I say, like octave or something. You have like a soprano recorder that's thought of like, a screechy but it's not really that, you could have control in the dynamics, very limited, but you still have dynamic control. It was just, it didn't fit in the time. There wasn't a maintained group of specialists in the instrument, so the new innovation of the concert flute, the Western concert flute, really let the recorder unfortunately go into decline into the classical and the Romantic era. However, there are still pieces that may have called for him. It wasn't like the recorder was just like forgotten. No, it was just there's a new fancy instrument. There wasn't very much interest in the recorder in the classical and Romantic era. So then the Western concert flute went off into the orchestra, and the recorder was just kind of an instrument of antiquity. That is until the 1900s, when you had this big revival period and people started looking at the old music. They started looking at these interesting old instruments. The recorder was mass-produced. A lot of innovations were made into it. And then we get mass-produced recorders and historically informed performances. That brought a lot of life back into the recorder. The recorder has been used in a lot of film music. It was actually called for in Star Wars. John Williams was writing the Ewok March, the Ewok Parade. That instrument that sounds like a very high whistle, that is actually a soprano recorder playing amidst the orchestra. So in the 1900s, there's this big revival and interest in historically informed performances, as well as looking at the recorder and the repertoire and trying to figure out how to add it and give a unique take on some of these pieces that you see in modern day. So here we are, we have people making recorders and stuff you could buy on Amazon and stuff like that. It's still a steady instrument, and it looks like it's getting more popularity as well as attention as just not a toy but a serious instrument that really has a very rich history and a very unique flavor to add in pieces of music, whether it be in pop or film music or in just regular classical. Alrighty, so that's a little bit about the history. It's just kind of a layman's history of it. We could go into depth in later videos about it. So, let's talk about the anatomy of a recorder first. I'll use the soprano since it's the most commonly seen version of the recorder to talk about this. So again, you have the head joint, you have this part called the beak. Fun fact, the recorder is sometimes known as the flute, a beck, or the beak flute, because if you see its mouthpiece, it looks like a beak. The recorder is also known as the flauta dolce, which means sweet flute, also known as the common flute in some scores. Flauta dolce because it has this kind of mellow sound, especially a wooden instrument. A wooden instrument has a much more mellow and rounded sound than a plastic instrument. Different nomenclature there for the different recorders. Okay, so back to that, you have a labium, and you have the window, that's the notch. Then you have the tone holes on the middle joint. You have a thumb hole in the back that's covered by the left thumb. You could also half cover this thumb hole in order to get into the next octave of the instrument. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tone holes, the last 2 of which are double. Some of the earlier recorders in the Renaissance period do not have double holes at the bottom here. And these double holes will just help with some of the accidentals at the bottom range of the instrument. And you now have the foot joint, or the bottom joint here. That's just the end of the instrument. They unfortunately do not stand up. This one does, but of course the bigger instruments are a little bit off balance. They won't do that. In order to reach one extra half step below your instrument's range, you could cover that bottom hole as the 8th hole to cover, and it would lower that bottom note by a half step. That's a little bit of a trivia there. Usually recorders come off in 2 pieces. The bottom joint comes off from the middle, and then the head joint also comes off there. Some of them are too small to do that, like my Sopranino is a 2-piece instrument. The tenor recorder has something special and unique to the larger members of the family, where you have a key here to cover that 7th hole. Since the holes are so spaced out on this instrument, they add a key here to help alleviate that. Some older instruments actually do not have that key, they just have the hole somewhere around here, so you could imagine the stretch that would take to do that. Alrighty, so let's play a scale on the soprano recorder, and the fingerings, I'll just go over the fingerings for a regular C major scale, and we'll talk about the different instruments and where they fall onto the range of the whole family. So the bottom note on the soprano recorder is played by pressing down all of the keys, or I should say all the tone holes, and you would go again left hand on top, right hand on bottom, your thumb, then the first finger, second finger, your middle finger, third finger. The pinky on your left hand doesn't cover anything. Then index, middle finger, that's weird finger that's next to the pinky, and then your right pinky goes at the bottom, 7th hole, covering both of the 2 ones if you have a model that has 2 holes at the bottom. So this is how you get the C on the soprano. That C is actually 1 C above middle C. However, in recorder music, it is written in the score to be 1 octave below how it actually sounds. So this is the C above middle C as the bottom note. How do you get to the next note in the C major scale would be to remove your right pinky, but keep everything else covered. The next note would be a concert E, and again, we're just going to remove the 2 fingers here. Well, don't cut off your fingers, please don't do that. We're just going to remove them from the tone holes. So now we're just doing, the thumb is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so the next note in the concert C scale would be a concert F. Depending on the model of your recorder, this fingering may be different. On a Baroque, you can see there's a tiny B right there. I don't know if it'll be picked up, but there's a little like engraved B on this instrument that tells us a Baroque fingering. For the concert F on a Baroque instrument, you would go your thumb, then your index on your left, then left middle, your left weird finger, and then your right index. You skip your right middle finger, then you go to your right weird finger, and then your right pinky. This is a concert F. So you put all the holes down except for your right middle finger for a concert F on a Baroque instrument. However, on the German instrument that would have a G here instead of a B, that fingering style says that an F would be just your right index finger plus all the holes covered by your left hand. Okay, so on our scale, the next note would be a concert G. Concert G, again, we're going to go from our concert F on the Baroque fingering, and we're going to remove all the fingers. No, again, do not cut off your fingers, please. We're going to just remove the fingers from those tone holes on our right hand. So now we just have the left hand tone holes covered, as well as the thumb hole on the back. So this is a concert G. So right now we have So we are basically like halfway up our scale. Okay, so the next note will be a concert A. The concert A will be produced by the thumb hole, then your left index, then your left middle, and this is what it's going to sound like. The next note is our concert B. This note, personally, is a very weird note. Concert B is a very strange pitch. So all you need are two fingers. You need your thumb on your left hand and your index finger on your left hand, and you're going to cover those corresponding holes for a concert B. So we're almost there after that concert B to a full C major scale. So before we get to that last note, we're going to play it. I think you could guess what note is going to be finishing off our scale there. It's the high concert C, one octave above our bottom C. So from here, then here comes our concert C. We're going to be using our thumb and our left middle finger to produce this note. There we go. So we got through all the notes of a regular C major scale. Let's go and run through the whole scale, shall we? Alright, so a few tips on getting that bottom C. Sometimes you'll hear it like squeak. Like that. Make sure your pinky is covering both of those tone holes at the bottom, especially your right middle finger, your right weird finger next to the pinky. You need to make sure you could adjust the instrument by twisting it. Usually the foot joint is put at a tiny bit of a diagonal side of the rest of the instrument to help with that. So just make sure you also have a very warm breath for the lower end of your instrument. That actually helps as well. There we go. Alright, so we could actually go up about 2-ish, 3-ish, even 3.5 octaves on a recorder if you're feeling adventurous. So the next octave, most of the notes are the same. There's some weird ones. One of the weird ones is the D above the top C. So that D is derived by just using the index finger, not the index finger, sorry about that, the left middle finger, and that's the only hole you would be covering. Okay, so this is where we get interesting. So now you could go higher in that octave by actually half covering your thumb hole. So E, remember concert E was supposed to be everything minus these two fingers with the thumb hole fully covered. However, to get to an E above that one octave, you just half cover the bottom hole, the thumb hole. F is kind of the same way, just minus the pinky on your right hand. When you're doing the regular F fingering on a Baroque instrument, it would be like this again. In order to go one octave, you just half cover the thumb hole, remove the pinky as well. Now the extended range to the G fingering stays the same, except again, the thumb hole is going to be half covered. A is the same thing, just half cover the hole with your thumb. Okay, so B, it's gonna be a little bit strange, no pun intended. But, so your bottom B was again the two fingers here, left thumb, left index. The higher B will be those two thumbs, or not two thumbs, two fingers on your left hand, and fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the two, your index and your middle finger on your right hand. So thumb, index finger on left, and then index finger on right and middle finger on right for your B. Wait, actually, you also add your left middle finger. My bad. Sorry about that. So again, half cover the thumb, left index, left middle, then right index, right middle for an octave B. Alright, so now let's get to the top C. The top C is going to be your thumb half covered again. Then you're going to have your left index, no left middle, but you're going to keep your right index and your right middle finger. So this is going to be a top C. So first our bottom C, or I should say the C that's one above the lowest C of the instrument. So remember our scale. So that C was thumb and middle. Our top C is going to be thumb half covered, left index, right index, middle finger. So here we go. There we go. That's the top C on the instrument. And of course you could go even higher, but those will be covered in a video specific to the scales in a recorder. Alright, so those were the fingerings for just a C major scale and kind of an extension of them. So let's try those fingerings on a Baroque alto recorder. So the alto recorder is going to be the F below the C on the soprano. It's a larger instrument, it's going to be lower. So let's see what happens. It's in the key of F, so all the fingerings will be the same, they just produce different pitches. Like, for example, this C, which is done by the G fingering, it's actually the bottom C on our soprano. They're the same exact C. Alright, so the next size down will be our tenor recorder. This one is one octave below our soprano. That means if we do all those fingerings that we went over, we should get a C major scale. Again, there's a key right here because my fingers won't stretch all the way down there to cover those last two notes. Alright, so this instrument being one octave below our soprano instrument, that should mean our C that was at the top of the C major scale, this one, which is thumb, left, and middle left, should be the bottom C on this instrument, on our soprano. That means that the tenor instrument is one octave below our soprano recorder. Alright, so what about the sopranino recorder? As stated earlier, the sopranino recorder is actually one octave above our alto. So that means when we do our fingerings for the C major scale that we've gone over, we will get a scale in F, in concert F. It's a very high instrument. No wonder it was known in the Baroque prepare it as the Flautino, aka a piccolo recorder. So, again, with it being one octave above our alto recorder, this F right here on our alto, which is given by left thumb and left middle, will actually be the bottom F on this soprano instrument. Alrighty, how about a little bit of a tune on one of the recorders? How about we'll play a little bit of the Concerning Hobbits from Lord of the Rings on our soprano as a closer for this video, so you could hear the recorder being used in a song.